In 1968, Italian writer and director Bruno Vailati led an expedition to film the wreckage of the Andrea Doria. The Andrea Doria was a beautiful and legendary Italian ocean liner that sank near Nantucket in 1956 after colliding with the Swedish ship Stockholm. 51 people lost their lives in the accident. Vailati, along with diver Stefano Carletti, explored the Doria, filming footage and documenting its position and condition. In 1970, a documentary of their expedition was released called Andrea Doria 74. The 74 refers to the depth, in meters, where the ship lies on the ocean floor. It is a strikingly beautiful documentary. But this episode is not about the sinking of the Andrea Doria. You can hear that story in episode 5 of Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs. In that episode, I interviewed Italian diver Andrea Murdock Alpini, who spoke of his experiences diving to the legendary wreck. In July of 2023, Alpini, along with fellow countrymen David Diana and Marco Setti, joined the American team of the DV Tenacious, including divers Joe Masrani, Chris Ogden, Brian Cunningham, Tim Whitehead, Anthony Tedeschi, and surface support by Jenn Sellitti. Together, they returned to the Andrea Doria to retrace the steps of Stefano Carletti and once again document the condition of the wreck. I caught up with Jenn Sellitti of the DV Tenacious, who appears in episode 13 of Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs, The Wrecks of the U-53, and we talked about this very special and at times very emotional return to the Andrea Doria. The return to the Andrea Doria, today on Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs. I'm very pleased again to welcome Jennifer Sellitti to the podcast. It's really a pleasure to have you back on. Thanks, Jenn.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Now, Jennifer Sellitti is the marketing director of Atlantic Wreck Salvage and a regular crew member aboard the DV Tenacious, a vessel that she operates with her partner, Joe Masrani. Jenn, I've invited you here today to talk about your latest expedition to the Andrea Doria. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But let's start with just a bit about you and Joe and what you do aboard the DV Tenacious.
Yeah, so Joe and I operate DV Tenacious. Joe has owned that vessel since 2010, and I started working with him aboard the vessel in about 2015, and we're both partners in life and partners in shipwreck. And we locate, dive, and salvage artifacts from ships in the North Atlantic. So we're always exploring, looking for new shipwrecks, and then, of course, diving historic shipwrecks like the Andrea Doria.
This dive trip was of particular significance. Can you tell us about that? Why was this so special?
This dive trip, I think, it's difficult to say it's the most significant trip we've ever taken, but it is. If it's not the one, it is definitely up there. And the reason for that is that this expedition commemorated the 55th anniversary of the first Italian-led expedition to the Andrea Doria, and also the 67th anniversary of the sinking. And the weather held up, so we were able to be out there both on the date of the collision and the date on the sinking as part of our 8-day expedition. We joined forces with Andrea Murdock Alpini of the diving of Italy and 2 other Italian divers, Marco Setti and David Diana, who joined us for the expedition to the wreck. And there were so many things that made this special. One is sort of bridging that tie between the American side of the expedition and, of course, the Italians, and sort of following in the immortal footsteps of Stefano Carletti and Bruno Vailati, who made the film Andrea Doria 74. And that 74 is for the 74-meter depth of the Andrea Doria, 242 feet. They made that film in 1968, and for Doria divers, for members of our crew and the divers who came before us, Andrea Doria 74 is just an iconic film that everyone has watched. And this expedition, the goal of the expedition was to document the condition of the wreck from bow to stern, and then also to sort of follow in Bruno Vailati and Stefano Carletti's footsteps and sort of retrace their steps around the wreck. I guess I shouldn't say footsteps, I should say fin strokes as they made their way around the wreck. So we accomplished all of those things and more on this trip.
And I found it interesting too that you actually visited the bow of the Stockholm this time as well. Now, you had done that previously, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes. So in 2020, our team identified the bow wreckage of the Stockholm. I'm always careful to say discovered because everybody knew that there was something there about 1.5 miles away from the Andrea Doria, but no one had kind of put it together that this was the bow of the Stockholm. And Steve Gatto, Tom Packer, and who are two of the salvors in possession of the Andrea Doria and are veteran Doria divers. I think they have more dives on the Doria than any other wreck divers. The two of them partnered with Joe, and we kind of created this expedition to finally scan and dive this thing that people suspected was the bow of the Stockholm. So we did that in 2020, and Tom and Steve, Joe, and two other divers, Jack Law and John Copeland, became the first people to dive the bow wreckage of the Stockholm. And it was kind of remarkable because the Stockholm wreckage, you would think that a bow of a ship that had sheared off and fallen to the bottom of the ocean would be all broken up and like really just this massive debris field. And of course it was a debris field, but it's also portions of it are intact. You can see the anchor of the Stockholm, which is really cool to look at underwater. And then you can see pieces of that reinforced hull plating that are the hallmarks of the Stockholm's icebreaker bow. So from that, we were able to formally identify that this is the bow wreckage of the Stockholm. And then no divers have been back since. So 2023, in this expedition, the Italians did one dive on the Stockholm and became the 6th, 7th, and 8th diver to touch that piece of history. And of course, more importantly, the first Italians to ever dive the bow of the Stockholm.
I asked Andrea about the most challenging part of this dive, and he said it was diving the bow of the Stockholm.
One of the hottest moments I had diving the Doria this time was not on the Doria. In fact, before you called me, I was writing the story about my dive on the remains of the bow of the Stockholm. At the moment, just 6 divers, including me, have dived those wrecks. Diving the bow of Stockholm was really, really tough. More tough than I have expected. But diving the bow of the Stockholm was fantastic to me because I had the chance to film what was hide for decades. Filming the bow of the Stockholm means that you can really play in the other side of the collision. Yeah? So that was really, really a good moment. It was really interesting.
Yeah, and I guess I should have prefaced this by saying the Stockholm was, of course, the vessel that struck the Andrea Doria. They collided together. The bow of the Stockholm was completely destroyed and fell off, and the Stockholm was able to make it back to New York, but without its bow, just in case anybody didn't know the story.
And it is incredible to see those old pictures of the Stockholm. If you can imagine, because I know we're on a podcast, right? If you can imagine, if people haven't seen them, a ship just missing its bow, like somebody cut it off in a straight line. And yet it was a strong ship, and she was able to steam back to shore carrying Andrea Doria's survivors aboard. The Stockholm actually rescued some of the Doria survivors and carried them back to New York. And there's a famous picture of the Stockholm without its bow steaming into New York with the Manhattan skyline behind it, which is always in my mind, one of the really, really remarkable images from this disaster.
Yeah, it's very surreal and spooky. I've seen that photo. And of course, if anybody wants to listen, the episode about the Andrea Doria can be found on the podcast, any podcast app, or on shipwrecksandseadogs.com. And in that episode, I interviewed Andrea Murdock Alpini, who was aboard the DV Tenacious last year when he dove that. The Andrea Doria is very important, of course, to the Italians. It's an important bit of history. It was a very large sense of pride at the time. Beautiful, luxurious ship. It really was the pride of Italy. So, having the Italians with you on this trip, what was it like working with them? I imagine it probably got a little bit emotional at times.
They were absolutely incredible. And as salvage divers, particularly, we often focus on artifacts from shipwrecks and focus on the diving, diving deeper, finding new wrecks. But that's not what it's all about. This expedition was really a perfect example of what the things we do really are about or should be about, and a reminder of that it's about connecting people, right? It's about connecting our two histories, connecting the history of Italy and the pride that the Italians have in this ship to the shipwreck. So for us, it was just an extraordinary experience to be able to be a part of that and to sort of facilitate these Italian divers coming here and be able to touch this shipwreck that is such an important part of Italian history, Italian shipbuilding history. We did have the official support of the shipyard that built the Andrea Doria, as well as the municipality of Genoa. So it was just really a thrill for us to be able to play a small part in keeping up the legacy of the Andrea Doria and to do that for the Italian people.
The photos and videos that you captured on the boat, as well as the videos and photos that were captured underwater, are really amazing. I made sure to review all of those prior.
Thanks.
The moment where Andrea Murdock Alpini brushes aside the mud and the sea anemones, that was emotional for me. Just seeing those letters appear and then having it juxtaposed against the original Italian diver who Stefano, who brushed that mud aside to reveal the letters. I can't imagine how the crew must have felt.
Oh man, and you talk about a picture being worth 1,000 words. If I had only one picture from this entire expedition, it would be that photo of Andrea brushing the letters off the Andrea Doria. In shipwreck diving history, that moment 55 years ago when Stefano Carletti did the same thing is a picture that's seared in the brains of any wreck diver who's watched Andrea Doria 74. And then to have Andrea be able to recreate that moment on the anniversary of the sinking and the collision was just extraordinary, beyond words. When I saw the picture, I got teary-eyed. When I see the picture, I get teary-eyed. When he posted it this morning, I got teary-eyed. And when I saw Stefano Carletti responding to his friend, Andrea and Stefano are friends, responding to his friend on Facebook, I got teary-eyed all over again.
You are emotional talking about it now. I am emotional hearing about it. And so was Andrea when I asked him about this moment.
Really, really impressed by what I've seen. It was a dive on the bow of the Doria. It was the first bow. In that dive, I saw Andrea Doria letters on his side. That was in the end probably the best ever dive I did in my life, because as an Italian, it was really impressive because the letters are over there again. And during the second dive I did on the same portion of bow, I started brushing the letters as my old friend Stefano Carletti, who was the first Italian diver to dive the Andrea Doria in 1968. I started brushing the letters to find the real skin ship. Most emotional dive I've ever done.
This particular dive, of course, you mentioned the goal was to film the entire ship bow to stern, and some wonderful footage is captured of that. What were some of the other things that were found, or what maybe surprised you about this trip?
So the Doria is always surprising because there are still artifacts coming up from the wreck. Every year, as the storms and the currents sort of change the condition of the wreck, new things appear. We had extraordinary visibility, which made filming and taking those still photographs excellent. There were days that we had between 50 and 70 feet of visibility, where normally we have about 20 to 30 on the wreck. So that was really a nice surprise. I think it was the result of some very, very strong currents we had on the first couple of days of diving, which made it difficult for the divers, but really kind of cleaned up the wreck for us a little bit. But it is always surprising to see the things that come up. We did have some people with us who were going inside the wreck and looking for artifacts, as Doria divers always do, and had some beautiful crystal come up, officer class china, as well as a beautiful, beautiful ornate vase recovered by diver Brian Cunningham, something that I had never seen before. We hadn't seen before. So we're curious to do some more research on that to see who the artist was that made it, to find out if it was cargo, if it was someone's personal possession, or whether it was something that was part of the furniture, if you will, of the Andrea Doria. But again, like, the artifacts are nice, right? The artifacts are great, and it is part of what we do. And we believe recovering artifacts helps connect people to the shipwreck. Just like when you go to a museum and you see a mummy, or you see ancient Greek tablet or something like that, it's connecting you to a place and a time and a bit of history. And we see that as the importance of bringing up artifacts. But the most surprising things are never tangible, right? The most surprising things are how just overwhelmed we were by this connection with our Italian brothers, and the deep sense of history of not only this wreck, but the history of diving that you connect to. Shipwreck diving in the North Atlantic was really born around the Andrea Doria, when local divers started trying to figure out ways to reach that wreck. So we're always also very, very conscious when we're at the Doria of all the divers who came before us and the things that they've accomplished and how they paved the way for us to be there. So, a line stretching all the way back in time, both to the first people who dived the wreck and back to the building and the sinking of this ship, and all of those people who survived and unfortunately lost their lives on that shipwreck. It's powerful, and it's powerful on so many levels.
Especially considering the technology at the time wasn't what it is now. So it was it's already a difficult dive now. Back then it was tremendously difficult, tremendously dangerous, as it still is. I can't emphasize enough when we talk about shipwrecks and wreck diving that anybody doing these dives better make sure they are sufficiently trained and are responsible and do their research and their planning. I'm not a diver myself, but I've, just talking to you and Andrea and some other divers, I know that's, one of the most important things is the research and planning. From your perspective as the boat operator and surface support on these trips, what kind of research and preparation do you do?
So in terms of surface support, what I'm always looking to know is, where are the divers going to be? How long are they planning to spend on the bottom? Because that will tell me how long it will take them to surface and when I should start looking out for them. But you're right. I mean, we do have surface support. We do dive plans. I always know where everybody's going to be, how long they're going to spend, what gases they're carrying, what they may or may not need. But at the end of the day, we were, more than 80 miles from Fairhaven, which was our staging point. We're in the middle of the ocean in an area with very strong currents in the North Atlantic, where weather changes on a dime. So you're right. You have to know the wreck. You have to know where you are. You have to know the boat. You have to know the divers. You have to know the weather. And all of those things come together to make a safe trip. People often call the Andrea Doria the Mount Everest of wreck diving. I don't know that we necessarily agree with that, because I think any dive can be a Mount Everest, but you have to prepare for it. And if you're prepared to climb Mount Everest and you try to calculate for all the risks, you're going to be able to be successful. And that's what we do. We do a risky thing, but we calculate, manage those risks, plan for those risks, have plans A, B, C, D, E, and F. And then if we have to get to plan G, we know each other well enough and the boat well enough and the divers well enough that we can successfully improvise. So you're never going to manage all the risks doing diving like this, but you can manage a lot of it with careful planning.
This expedition had special significance for David Diana, one of the Italian divers who was with you. Tell us about that.
So David's grandfather was Alfredo Brunoli, was aboard the Andrea Doria at the time of the collision. And he survived the collision and actually steamed back to New York aboard the Stockholm with its missing bow. So Alfredo has this connection to both. I'm getting chills again. And Alfredo and his grandson David have this special connection to both shipwrecks. And on the anniversary of the collision, David brought down a sign to the wreck. It was a wet notes, so the divers can write these wet notes. And on one page, it said his grandfather's name and the date that he traveled on the Andrea Doria. And then on the next page, it said David Diana was here, and then the date exactly 67 years to the day. And when he came up, we didn't know that he had carried that down. And when he came up and he started to explain to me in, sort of broken English what had happened, and then took out those wet notes and showed it to me. I still get choked up when I think about it, because it was really it's so extraordinary to be a part of that moment. And that is another reminder of what this is all about. To see the grandson of a survivor dive this wreck 67 years to the day that his grandfather was on it, and to have not just an abstract connection to a history, but a real personal connection to the history and heritage of that ship through his family. It was it's indescribable. And the feeling of just, watching that moment unfold.
And as fate would have it, you were able to send me a video clip of David Diana after he came up from the dive, and he is holding the wet notes you mentioned.
Today, we made something special. Andrea gave me a fantastic present. He filmed me, because yesterday we wrote something special for me. July 1956, Alfredo Brunoli, my grandfather, was on board. Today, 25 July 2023, David Diana is here. That's all. Amazing.
And like so many people who are traveling aboard the Andrea Doria, like when we think of the Titanic and the Andrea Doria and the Lusitania and some of these big ships that in one way or another have met a fatal end, you think about the first class passengers, right? And the opulence. And we think of the Andrea Doria as this opulent luxury Art Deco Italian liner. But David's grandfather was poor. He survived World War II. He fought in Russia during World War II. He came back, and all he wanted to do was see America. And he scrimped and he saved to pay his way on a cabin on a third class ticket. And he saves all his life trying to kind of to come to America and see this thing. And then the Andrea Doria collides with another ship, and he kind of arrives in New York with nothing because it all went down with the ship. And then he went back home and he never got to see America again. So it was also something I talked to Andrea and David about as well, is that we often focus so much on like the famous passengers that are aboard ships and the first class passengers. But the real interesting stories sometimes come from common people who are just trying to take a vacation of a lifetime or cross to another country to start a new life. and wind up either surviving or perishing in tragedies like this one.
And that really drives home the point of wreck diving and salvage efforts. Sometimes people are critical of bringing up artifacts. I understand part of that argument. But on the other hand, and I know this is why you do it and why Andrea does it, because there are stories there that you don't want to forget. You're helping keep alive the memory of the people that were on that ship. Yeah, in the case of the Andrea Doria, the vast majority survived, but nevertheless, it was still a very tragic event and the loss of a very important, valuable ship to the Italians. So by doing these wrecks and having divers like David going down and connecting to that ship that his grandfather was on and survived, that's invaluable for him and even for you. That witnessing that event and just hearing about it, for me, it's very emotional. I can't imagine what he must have felt like. But again, in general, this is just keeping those stories alive, keeping the memory of those people alive. One of the things that Andrea Murdock Alpini told me was he really wanted to go down again because he wanted to monitor what was going on with the ship, how much of it was left, because it is deteriorating. Of course, it's sinking further into the mud and just degrading over time, as you would expect. So how long is it going to be there? Because eventually it will be gone and there won't be anything else to visit. From my standpoint, that's why I appreciate what you do so much.
Thank you. Yeah. But with the North Atlantic, we hear all sides of the argument, and I understand why some people want to keep artifacts in situ, right? They want to keep them on the wreck. And in certain places around the world, like in the Great Lakes, for example, where things are very well, the waters preserve things, or deep shipwrecks, or even in places like the Mediterranean, where the conditions are different, that may make sense. But the North Atlantic is harsh territory for shipwrecks. The shallower North Atlantic, the diveable North Atlantic. These wrecks get battered by current, by fishing nets. These wrecks aren't protected, right? So the fishermen, clam dredges, all sorts of things, the weather, the storms. There are certain wrecks that we go one year and the next year they're entirely covered in sand and we have to dig them back out again. The Andrea Doria, our team on our boat has been diving the Andrea Doria since we got the boat in 2010, so 13 years. And we have seen a marked deterioration in the shipwreck from 2010 till now. Whole rooms collapsing, the areas you once were able to penetrate that are no longer there. And that means anything inside them is going to be just covered by wreckage, heavy wreckage, sand, and eventually, like you said, it will be all gone. So our feeling is if we can bring this stuff up and show it to the public in films, even on our Facebook feed, right? In museums, in artifact displays, and even some do wind up in divers' personal collections or other personal collections. We take that obligation seriously, and this isn't just art that hangs on a wall. If we have something from the Andrea Doria, I feel like it's our duty when someone sees it to explain where it's from, why it's there, why it's important, whether that's something that's in my house, in a museum, or on display for a larger audience somewhere. So with shipwreck salvage, we believe comes responsibility. And I think as long as you honor the responsibility to share what you bring up with the public, that it's better that the public be able to connect to these things than to just leave them, 80 miles from the coast of Fairhaven or 60 miles off the coast of Nantucket, buried under a hunk of wreckage at 240 feet where nobody, but a rare lucky few would be able to see it.
Yeah, that's very well said. I agree. Regarding the results of this particular dive expedition, when can the general public expect to see more footage or what's next for the plans regarding this, what you found on this expedition?
So Andrea is working on a new book about the Andrea Doria. I believe that will be out next year. And he is putting a film together about this particular expedition that will be out this fall. And I don't want to speak too much for him, but it's my understanding that the film is going to be very much about retracing the steps of Bruno Vailati and Stefano Carletti and Al Giddings and the Italian, quote unquote, Italian expedition to the wreck. And his book is a little bit more about the history of the Andrea Doria and the collision and some things that he's uncovered by going through archives. So the two separate projects both will use footage from this. In addition, we were working with a national health institute in Italy, as well as the University of Padua. We were doing experiments while we were at sea also.
Wow.
So they were, yeah. It was a little frustrating for the divers because I'd be going, you have to do your homework. You have to do your homework, because they'd have to fill out a paper before every dive, take a urine test and a mouth swab before every dive and after every dive. But what these health organizations are doing is analyzing the effect of stressful, repetitive diving at deeper depths on divers and on the human cells and on human physiology.
Wow,
so
very cool.
That was a part of what we were doing out there. So there's a little research component going on too. And for us, we're using this footage in some other projects that we're working on, but really this was the Italian show, right? So we are just eagerly awaiting what Andrea is going to do with all of that footage. We gave all of our footage to him. Everything Joe shot, I shot will be available to him, as well as to the people of Italy, the municipality of Genoa, and the archives, the Andrea Doria archives. So we've given all of that to Andrea to take back to Italy. And we really see this as their expedition. And although it was our boat that facilitated the expedition, we were really the ones who were honored to be a part of all of this.
It's a labor of love, as they say.
Absolutely.
And where can people find DV Tenacious on social media?
So we are on, our website is www.dvtenacious.com, and we are working on a new website. So that'll be out in probably the fall, because I can't get anything done in the summer. And our Facebook page is just at DV Tenacious. So D like dive, V like vessel, the word tenacious. And that's also our Instagram handle. And we have a YouTube page, but I think you just Google DV Tenacious Atlantic Wreck Salvage and that will pop up. But all of the content about the Andrea Doria expedition is either on our Facebook and Instagram pages or on Andrea Murdock Alpini's Facebook page, and Phi Diving. It's PHY Diving is his company in Italy.
And I can vouch for the content you've been posting and the content Andrea has been posting. Just fascinating and beautiful videos and photos. And of course, Andrea's writing about his experiences is always very beautiful and poetic.
I know, it makes me wish I spoke Italian, because the Google Translator thing or the Facebook Translator thing just doesn't do it justice.
Right.
We try. Thank you so much. Thank you for having, and thanks for doing this. It's very, very important. You know, it's very, very important work that you're doing, keeping the history and the memory of these wrecks alive in the way you do, and really bringing them to life in the way that we've been talking about and the way that we hope to do it. So I just appreciate you so much and your podcast so much, and we love listening to it.
Thank you. Likewise, of course, what you do is much more difficult than what I do.
I don't know. I wouldn't want to put these podcasts together.
That's going to do it for the return to the Andrea Doria. Thank you so much to Jenn Sellitti of the DV Tenacious and Andrea Murdock Alpini of Phi Diving for joining me. Thanks to you for listening. Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs is written, produced, and edited by me, Rich Napolitano. You can follow the show at ShipwrecksPod on social media and at shipwrecksandseadogs.com. Original theme music is by Sean Siegfried, and you can follow him on YouTube at Sean Secret and on the web at sean.siegfried.se. Join me again in 2 weeks for another episode, and until then, don't forget to wear your life jackets.